Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk from the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi Richman here together with Yitzchak Reuven today, the 10th day of the month of Elul, 5775. It's August 25th, 2015, and this week, Parshat Ki Teitzei, when you go out to war against your enemy. Yitzchak, last week you kind of gave it to me for adopting the position, even temporarily, of the Balei Musar, the sages who explain on an ethical / rational viewpoint that the divine service of the month of Elul can be seen in an illusion in the names of the Torah portions of how we need to, for example, we were talking about in Parshat Shoftim, we need to assign officers at our own gates. In other words, that we need to take responsibility for ourselves, and especially during this month of Elul, we need a lot of introspection. We need to mount our defenses against the erosion of our personal attributes. This week in Parshat Ki Teitzei al Oivecha, when you go out to war against your enemy, right? So the same approach is made by some of the great sages, that this is can be seen as an allegory during this month of Elul. I mean, the main enemy that we all have to deal with is our own negativity, our own evil inclination, Yetzer Hara. And the main task of the month of Elul really is to get right with God, is to prepare ourselves, to prepare our hearts for repentance. And you were like, you don't need to come on to that because...
may I explain myself a little more clearly perhaps this week?
Sure.
I don't negate those approaches. And they're very beautiful, they're very important, they're very significant, they're very necessary. All I'm saying is that there's another level of introspection that I think is incumbent upon us now as individuals who are part of the nation of Israel and the society of Israel in the land today. And that other aspect of introspection is introspection concerning ourselves as a nation, as a society. That it's not, it's not an escape from introspection. It's right. We have to begin thinking of ourselves much more seriously as a nation.
It's a perfect balance, and I think I made it very
not
clear.
As a community in the exile.
I do think that
I know you do, of course.
In that broadcast, I did make it very clear that I am not in any way escaping here. This is not an escapist, thing here. In fact, it's a very important principle in Torah study. Ein hamikra yotzei midei pshuto. That a verse is never extrapolated to the point where it loses its simple interpretation. And anyway, the whole idea, I think, of everything that we emphasize in our approach to Torah study, at least in the lessons that we share publicly, and our approach to everything, is the vitality, the vibrancy, the reality of the Torah in our lives today, here in the land of Israel especially. And so there's always this back and forth. There's always this dichotomy, if you will, of the nation and the individual, And I think that's exactly what you and I are talking about here. And I don't think either of us minimizes either approach. The nation has to find himself... the individual has to find himself within the nation. The message of the Torah is to every individual, and the implication is staggering of what the nation's responsibility is in the land. And of course, it goes further than this, because the concentric circles that are formed go and reverberate amongst all the nations, because this is the message for all humanity. So
let's just take this opening verse as an example. When you go out against your enemies, and yes, it can be interpreted and should be interpreted as an individual level, as fighting against your own personal demons.
This is a perfect example.
Which obviously, in the example, and it's simple understanding of a soldier at war, he's also going against his own personal demons and urges. But again, last week's Parshat and this week's Parshat have so much to say about the conduct of war, Israel's conduct at war, the conduct of soldiers.
Last week, for example, when we were talking about the exemptions, right? We were talking about the anointed priest and who calls away for the exemptions. Listen, human nature is a tremendous obstacle to all of us. Our own battles, like you say, our own demons. This is the first thing that we have to overcome. And so, especially during this month of Elul, which classically is all about self-knowledge, self-awareness, self-improvement, and the recognition of what our demons are, the Torah is very easily, clearly, and glibly speaking on so many levels at once to who we are on a level that maybe we're even in denial of, that we have to deal with. And of course, guess what? On the same level, the nation is also in denial. The whole nation also has a tremendous amount of work to do in terms of self-identity, who we are, fighting personal demons on the national level as well, purging it from the national consciousness. The analogy is so perfect because everything that the individual is going through is exactly what the nation is going through. And you know what? We have a heck of a lot of work to do as a nation to clean up Elul and all around the year. And it's all about getting right with Hashem and living according to Torah, coming into the land and embracing this Torah and living according to it.
We could even take the classic mashal, a classic example that we always quote each year, and I mentioned last week of Elul, the king is in the field, and the idea is that the king, God, is who's usually distant in his castle. At least that's the way we feel. He's very close now. He goes out of his way, as it were, to be close to us, so that we can feel the immediacy and the need for change and for self-reflection. But we could also say that the king is in the battlefield and leading the battle and combining all these lessons we're learning about Israel at war against the outside enemy and against the inner enemy, and that God, is leading that battle, and the Kohanim are playing on blasting the trumpets, and we have to overcome our own fears, and we have to overcome our own limitations, all these things that we learned in last week's Parshat about getting ready for battle. And the battle we're fighting now is, as individuals and as a nation, is overcoming our own inhibitions toward fulfilling God's will.
Right. Our own crisis of confidence.
Right.
And the righteousness of our own path. Now listen, this Torah portion, Parshat Ki Teitzei, beginning in the 10th verse of chapter 21 of the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, is just chock full of so many amazing commandments, okay? Begins with this very enigmatic, almost inexplicable commandment of the woman of beautiful form that a soldier sees in battle that I want to talk about in a moment. It talks about the wayward and rebellious son, which is, according to an important position in the Talmud, never even happened. The whole thing is kind of just a metaphor, because it's impossible for there to really be such a child, because the criteria of how he has to act exactly, even what he has to appear like, is so. It's impossible for there to be such a phenomena either. So then why is the Torah spending words? The Torah is so economical with words. There are so many different commandments here. The whole idea of sending the mother bird away from the nest, which, by the way, we have a tremendously in-depth analysis of in this week's Torah portion. Our video lesson is all about the concept of sending the mother bird away from the nest. So many different commandments in this Torah portion, but beginning with this whole idea of the Eshet Yafat Torah. So Rashi says that Torah is only speaking here about the evil inclination, about the negativity within a person, right? So the parsha begins by saying, okay, when you go out to war against your enemies and Hashem delivers your enemy into your hands, and then you see a woman, and she's a captive woman, she's beautiful, and the soldier is attracted to her. So there are instructions here about how to proceed. He can't just have her, he has to bring her home, and then she has to be in his home for a month, and she has to be in mourning for her former life. She has to make herself look ugly. And if he still feels the same attraction after that month, so then he is allowed to live with her. Otherwise, though, if the thrill is gone, then he has to send her out, right? So there are two totally diametric opposing views about this mitzvah that I have encountered, which are really amazing. One is the simple interpretation of the verses as we're reading them, is that, okay, this is about a soldier in the midst of battle, and he, in the heat of battle, brings out the worst in a person. He's like got this lust, right? He sees an attractive woman of the enemy camp, and he wants her. So the Torah is basically facilitating this prohibited relationship and making it permitted under these circumstances. And these are the guidelines of how to, as it were, make it kosher, how to make it redeemable. And if you do it this way, then okay, you could have her. And in other words, it sounds like it is a very, very b'diavad situation, meaning it's a very, very second best kind of thing. Okay, what could you do? You're not an angel. You're human. So the Torah is giving some sort of halachic accommodation.
But it also creates a cooling off period.
Right, giving in. Okay, that's the simple interpretation of these verses. Now, the way I'm going to look at that, though, is I'm extremely disappointed. Like that's the Torah's attitude about a Jewish soldier is. Well, let's let him have it. Like, okay, cool him down and everything like that. Cold water, but okay, we're gonna let him give in to his most base instincts. Where do I find the Torah, which is constantly calling a person up to a higher level of consciousness and living? Where do I find another example like this of the Torah giving in to a person's most base nature and basically giving it a stamp of a kosher approval? It's like I'm a little bit disappointed. Like I don't get it. Like this is doesn't seem right. You know, that the Torah, instead of trying to inspire this person to master his evil inclination, to master his lust, is like giving into it. But that's the simple interpretation of these verses. But on the other hand, we have an approach which is so much the polar opposite that it is staggering, and that is the approach of the Holy Or HaChaim, famous commentary of the Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, who was a very holy, great luminary of the Jewish people. He was a sage from Morocco, 17th century, 18th century, who is actually buried on the Mount of Olives. He journeyed from Morocco and spent the last part of his life in Jerusalem, in the land of Israel, established a yeshiva here. He is absolutely universally acknowledged to be one of the greatest authorities on the Torah, and his commentary is also universally acknowledged by every subsequent generation's leaders as having been written with divine inspiration. What could I tell you? That you just need to study his words to see that he is a giant, an absolute giant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And many times he brings a more mystical interpretation also, at the same time that he is very erudite on a basic and legal level as well. He has the most incredible approach to these verses, and here's what he says. He says, the fact that this soldier of Israel was in a war in which he was risking his life for the defense of his nation and the defense of his land against the enemy, the fact that he was in this situation is a tremendous merit for him, because he was doing a holy thing. This war is a mitzvah, and it is his tremendous selflessness and dedication that he was doing it, and therefore, because he was doing this tremendous act for God, he merits to a level which could only be called divine inspiration. And what happens is he sees something in this woman on the soul level. It's not about her physical form. He sees inside of her a spark of holiness that he needs to redeem. And the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, the Holy Or HaChaim, light of life, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, he actually deduces this from the grammar of the words that it says here in the Torah, V'ra'ita b'shivya eshet yafat toar, and you will see in captivity a woman of beautiful form, v'chashakta ba, and you desire, it says here in the art scroll, and you will desire her, but that's not what it means. V'chashakta ba means your desire is in her. You see something in her on a deeper level. This isn't talking about a skin deep level at all. And so he takes the very opposite viewpoint of, let's say, Rashi, who quotes the idea of Dibrat Torah neged Yetzer Hara, that the Torah here is only speaking about a base thing. Base is opposite. The Torah is dealing with how to deal with your evil inclination. And so, okay, what could you do? You're only a human being. Do it this way. He says, no, it's the opposite. This is like a holy endeavor that because he's in this war, he's zocheh, he merits to this tremendous illumination of prophecy. He looks at this woman and he sees, oh my goodness, there's something in there that is from primordial time. There's a holy soul in that woman, and by my marrying her and by her becoming a Jewish woman, that is, holiness is going to be elevated and liberated to the side, right? So what happens, according to the Orach Chaim, it's very simple. He takes her home, and she goes through this process of making herself vilified in his eyes. She's taking off the seductive thing that she was wearing, and she's putting on a house coat of a regular housewife, right? And she's making her nails ugly, whatever it is that she's doing, right? And what does the Torah say? The Torah says, well, she does this and she's weeping for her father and mother for a full month. Thereafter you may come to her and live with her, and she shall be a wife to you. But it shall be that if you do not desire her, then you shall send her on her own. But you may not sell her for money. You shall not enslave her, because you have afflicted her. In other words, if you feel the same way after a month, that proves that it was never about what she looks like. Because here she's made herself look horrible, and you still feel the same way. That is the proof that you were right, that you were given something from Hashem, a signal. But if you don't feel that way anymore, that shows no, it was in fact just an infatuation, and you can't do it. So, but what's my point? And this, I think this is profound, and it's absolutely an amazing insight on the Kabbalistic level that the Orach Chaim is saying. He's saying that the Torah here is talking about a level of divine inspiration and not mere sexual attraction. But what I find profoundly amazing about this is the very dichotomy of the two positions that are so opposite. My goodness, on the one side, you've got a position of the rabbis who are very serious and plugged in to Torah and to the transmission of tradition and divine inspiration, and they're saying, you know what, this is a very unfortunate set of circumstances whereby a person reveals that after all you're just a person and you're one step away from an animal. This is how you feel. You want that woman. You know what? Fine. Do this and this and this. Take her. Mutar lach. Here's a stamp. Just a second. Here's a stamp. Okay. But the other side that I'm quoting now of the Holy Orach Chaim, who is giant among men, he's saying, no, this is something absolutely opposite. This is a person who has had a holy lightning bolt of revelation, and I'll prove it to you, because if he still feels that way, it shows that it was never about the physical attraction at all. But what my point is that, you know what? You were right. Exactly. It's like what I wanted to say. There is no contradiction, because that is a human being. Right. They can both be true, and there is no contradiction. It might be like this. It might be like that. And that's what a man is. And this is such a Torah for Elul. So that this is the answer and the personification, the embodiment of our opening discussion. Right. That's what Elul is all about. It's like, who are you? Do you know? Well, get to know yourself. Think about who you are. You know, don't. And it's like a human being is so complex. And you know what? You can be so high and you can be so low, and everything in between. And that is the beauty of Torah. There's no denial here. We need to be masters of ourselves. It could be that it was absolutely just something that you should have had a leash on yourself. Or it could be that Hashem is saying that soul has been waiting for thousands of years for someone to elevate her. And you know what? Time will tell. But both are possible, and it doesn't mean that you're bad, and it doesn't mean that you're necessarily good. It means that Hashem gives us these opportunities for growth, and I think the same thing is true in every situation that we're in, and I think that's why this Woman of Beautiful Form is yes, also a metaphor, not only for the month of Elul, but for all the time. We're in situations, and we deal with things, and we have to constantly analyze our motivation, constantly analyze what is pushing us, where is the drive coming from? Is it altruistic? Is it something that we have our own agenda that we don't even know, that we won't even admit it? Is it something that Hashem is allowing us to be part of a historic process? And you know what? The very same thing could be our greatness and our hour in history, or it could be our total undoing and just another proof of how base we are. And that's life. That's life. We make it what it could be. It's in our hands.
And I'll contradict myself, but I won't really contradict myself with my opening statement, that 30-day period, that 1 month that she takes off her makeup and makes herself gross, that's the perfect definition of introspection and of stock taking that we do in Elul. We take our own selves, we take off all that
the king
makeup.
in the field is that I wasn't prepared. I wasn't wearing my good
right.
stuff.
So we take all our everything that we do all year long to make ourselves look good in our own eyes and beautify ourselves, and we strip ourselves of that, and then after 30 days
we say to Hashem,
we still
basically,
love ourselves, then we
no, we say to Hashem, if you still want us,
right.
Like it's like if you
if we still want ourselves, after
now that you see what we really are, you're right. I'm saying to myself, and now that I see who I really am, is there any hope? Is there any hope that there's some spark of holiness buried deep in there that can be redeemed? I'd like to believe that there is. And that's really, it's a beautiful Torah for Elul. This whole beginning of Parshat Ki Teitzei. And so that battle, you're right, it's for the nation. It's for the individual. It's just raging all the time on so many levels. And it's a battle of self-knowledge. And if anything, Elul is all about just really understanding our own motivation, getting past our personal agendas, and living for Hashem in every way, for the coming year, for the rest of our lives, for the individual, for the nation, and really redeeming the captive in everything, especially in ourselves. Temple Talk. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. Today is the 10th day of the month of Elul, 5775, 25th day of August 2015. This is Yitzchak Reuven. In the studio with me is Rabbi Richman. We are of the Temple Institute, and we have been talking about Parshat Ki Teitzei, when you go out to war. This week's Torah reading, and we've been concentrating on the opening verses, the idea of the woman of beautiful form, Eshet Yafat Torah, and different interpretations of that verse and what that all means to us. I want to add a couple of things to that, Rabbi. One is, so we have these two different interpretations. One is the interpretation, traditional interpretation of many rabbis, sages, that we're talking about a soldier who is in a battle against his lesser angels, right? He's struggling against his own urges here, and he needs some Torah help in order to keep himself in control. And the other is, of course, the Orach Chaim, who takes the exact opposite and says this man has been inspired by this tremendous mitzvah that he is doing, fighting, battling for God, for Israel. And with that inspiration, he sees holiness that he would not have seen otherwise.
He sees a vision.
Right.
Literally a vision.
And, I think I would tend to say, well, I love that second. I love the Ador Chaim, like it's beautiful. But realistically, maybe the first interpretation is more mitziyuti, more realistic, more of this world. However, after last year's war, 50-day war, when Israel was fighting against Hamas in Gaza, the holiness, the elevation of our soldiers that I think we all personally witnessed, and in fact to the whole nation, that was a prime example of a nation rising up to that occasion and gaining, acquiring a whole other level of holiness, that and getting that vision and that inspiration that we're all seeing, the good and the beautiful in one another. I think that was a historical proof that the Or Chaim's interpretation is very, very mitziyuti, very, very realistic, and should not be discounted. And that really is the interpretation that we should strive for in our lives. The other thing I'd like to say is that we use this same mashal, the same story, interpreted in our opening words of the Amidah, of the standing prayer, the Shemona Esrei, that we say 3 times a day. We say, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach. God, open up my lips in prayer, that I can turn to you in prayer. And the first letters of those 3 words spell the word Eshet, as in Eshet Yifat Toar. Meaning, we take the same inspiration.
And Fi Yagid Tehilatecha is Yifat.
Right. The Hemshech, the next 3 words. And my lips and my mouth will speak your praise.
Right.
And we, it's an idea, a concept that we hearken back to that understanding of self introspection and reflection, and who we are and where we're going, as we begin our prayer 3 times a day. That we each day 3 times we have to do this self what's the word I want to say, measuring up who we are, taking stock, and again trying to aspire toward the best.
Release the secret.
Yeah.
When we stand before Hashem, we say, I want to release that part that's trapped.
Right. That holy, beautiful holy soul.
Again, what I find the most compelling about the very existence of 2 such opposite interpretations of something here in this week's Torah portion is the very fact that they exist, the very fact that there's 2 such opposite ways of looking at something, and like you said, there's no contradiction. This is the whole beauty of our walk with Hashem and our efforts to refine ourselves and to study and to become better people, is that this is the sum total of a human being, these extremes, and they're both true and they're both distinct possibilities, and everything in between also. It's like the Torah is not hiding anything here. This is the possibility, is that a person can strive for greatness and a person can be low. And this is the beauty of living, to try and find out which is it, which are we going to make it. And
this is, how do we look at our lives? How do we look at Torah itself? Do we look at Torah as a means toward striving toward the very, very best and the very highest in life and ourselves?
And this is what Elul is all about.
And I'd like to take it one step further and relate it to the Temple Mount, because if there's ever been a situation where a beautiful soul, a beautiful thing, the object of our desire
is trapped before our very eyes,
and
camouflaged
and made as ugly as possible, then it is the Temple Mount.
And again, it's so fitting because the king is in the field, and the field is the original field of dreams. The field, Yitzchak Avinu, Isaac, the forefather, called it a field. Abraham called it a mountain. Isaac called it a field.
Yaakov called it a house.
And that is the field. And the fact is, that's where the king is.
That's where the king is. That's where the woman of beautiful form is trapped. And I would like to say that I'm very encouraged that Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, are not sending that woman who has been compelled to make herself horrible in our eyes. We're not sending her away. We desire her. We desire that place. We desire that the Shekhinah, God's presence, which is in that place.
Because what we see is not what she looks like. What we see is much deeper, on a much deeper level. Now, make no mistake here, not to be confused with the women on the Temple Mount that are very ugly and dressed very ugly. We're not talking about those now. Yitzchak is speaking about the Temple Mount as a metaphor for herself, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, like we say in that verse from Psalms before we begin the Shemona Esrei prayer. We're talking about the Shekhinah. So it's the Shekhinah herself, the divine presence on the Temple Mount, that is sullied and whose presence is hidden. But we're not talking about the actual Muslim women in burqas who attack the Jews. Those aren't the captive women.
No.
But speaking of those women,
they should be.
And of course, we have been reporting about this phenomena for as long as you want to talk about the fact that it's been acknowledged already for a long time by the security services that indeed, as we were one of the original sources who reported to you, these groups of agitators on the Temple Mount are paid mercenaries. They receive a monthly salary from Hamas itself to hassle, to infuriate and intimidate and even physically intimidate the Jewish visitors on the Temple Mount. And the truth is that in the past few weeks, the situation on the Temple Mount has become practically intolerable. Kudos to all those people who come to the Temple Mount and who demonstrate, like Yitzchak just finished saying, our great love and attraction for the secret of the Temple Mount, which is the divine presence itself and the honor of the divine presence. It's not an easy experience. It's even become slightly, perhaps, dangerous. These groups, and they're not only women, they're also men. They have become more and more brazen. They actually have been physically attacking the security forces and getting away with it. They've been kicking and striking police officers and Jewish worshippers, and that level of audacity, unfortunately, is just another indication of Israel's impotence in dealing with the monster that it's created by allowing the Jordanian monarch to claim the Temple Mount as his own. Just today, there's a piece in the paper that the Jordanian parliament certified or something that they want to very greatly increase the number of Waqf guards on the Temple Mount from 200 to 500. That's an army of a fifth column, literally, of a foreign agent in the middle of Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, right? The Waqf guards. The Waqf guards who work hand in hand with these groups called the Marbitian, whatever it is, the guardians of Al-Aqsa, these devil women who, and devil men, who lay in wait and ambush the Jewish worshippers. But actually, just yesterday, all of a sudden, there's a very interesting development in the news about the King's Field, about the Temple Mount. And the development is, okay, what happened was people went up in the Temple Mount yesterday morning, and all of a sudden they had the surprise of their lives because these groups of mercenaries and inciters were not there. they weren't there, and it was quiet, and it was actually kind of sweet. It was like a very sweet visit. No, they still weren't allowed to pray, and they were still monitored very closely by the police and the Waqf guards, and they were still limited to a very small group, and they were still not allowed to drink water from the fountains, even though there were no inciting or hostile Muslims that were watching or anything like that. But basically, they were not attacked as they have been. That was yesterday. Today, second day in a row, pinch me if I'm dreaming. We're not sure yet of what's going on. Second day in a row, again, the hostile elements were not allowed on the Temple Mount. The Jews were. But as soon as the Jewish visiting hours, which are very limited, are finished, then the hostile elements were let back onto the Temple Mount. And so it turns out that the Minister of Internal Security, whose name is
Gilad Erdan,
who is a member of the ruling Likud faction, he actually, and this is the language of the official press release. Gilad Erdan, who is the Minister of Internal Security, turned to the Defense Minister, Moshe Ya'alon, and he requested, with the backing of the intelligence community and the police brass, he requested that the organizations that we've been describing, and they are actually organizations of these paid insiders on the Temple Mount, he requested that they be officially branded outside the law, that they be officially classified as illegal organizations, and that would be an incredible thing if that really happens. Now, what's the timing here? That hasn't happened yet, but on the very same day, the first day that the Jewish people experienced an easing of the circumstances on the Temple Mount, we all read this press release that that the Minister of Internal Security intends on trying to push through a law that would outlaw these groups as illegal terror groups. So there's mixed reaction in the Jewish world to this development. Some look at it and bless it and laud it and give it tremendous praise as being perhaps a first step in the renewal of full Jewish rights on the Temple Mount. And they look at it as the beginning of perhaps a new age when eventually Jewish people might actually be able to pray on the Temple Mount, as has already been established by law that we should be able to. Others are looking at this as maybe just a populist kind of subterfuge where they're just realize that things were getting out of hand and they want to try to quiet down opposition and they want to try to kind of throw a bone to the Jewish groups because everything is much deeper than it really looks, and there's a lot of subterfuge, and there's always political machinations, and it has to do with Netanyahu's shaky coalition and showing that he's really cares about the nationalist Jews and what they care about, and all sorts of things. It's just, who's on first, who's on second. You need a really smart head to keep up with the possibilities in the political world. But I'm saying some are saying this is very positive, and some are saying no, this is just well, if he was really serious about recognizing that these terrorists are terrorists, so then what does that have to do with getting the approval of the defense minister, and also what does that have to do with the fact that the Jews are still treated like subhumans on the Temple Mount by the police themselves? By the police themselves, they're still not allowed to pray, which is illegal, and the police have no right to stop them from praying. They're still treated like felons when they come and they visit the Temple Mount. So time will tell, and it could be that. Well, I'll tell you what it definitely is. Whether it is going to be a blessing or it's just a smokescreen, I think we have the power to turn it into a blessing. And once again, I think this very much has to do with the tremendous awareness that we have generated regarding the plight of the Temple Mount. And this is a good opportunity for us to thank all those people who are still sending letters, sending emails to various government ministers. If you want to do that, go to our Facebook page.
Facebook page.
where we continue to repost the link to an email campaign that we initiated a while ago, I think almost 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And we've had, thankfully, hundreds and hundreds of responses of people who are writing emails to all sorts of personalities in the Knesset, in the government of Israel, expressing outrage and expressing their disapproval of the fact that non-Muslims do not have the right to pray on the Temple Mount. I think that's all having an effect, and it's all part of the process that we are witnessing here, of the fact that the Temple Mount can no longer be ignored, the fact that its centrality to our existence is coming to the forefront, and so many people are aligning themselves with this cause and realizing that the Temple Mount is the center of the life of the Jewish people, and we must correct the terrible historical wrong of our ignoring the Temple Mount for all of these decades as a prerequisite to the true redemption of the people of Israel, and of course the rebuilding of the Holy Temple.
Thank God we have people here who do see that beauty hidden in that unfortunately, physically, on the surface, ugly situation. You know, Rabbi, Parshat Ki Teitzei is like a grab bag of so many different commandments and different types of commandments, and you know, one commandment follows another, and sometimes there seems to be, why is this following that? What's going on here? And it concludes with, remember Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you as you left Egypt. And I think that's a good bookend, really, for the opening verse, which we've been discussing with this entire time at length.
What an unbelievable thought.
You know, when the incident of Amalek first took place, when it was recorded in the book of Exodus, it really describes that Amalek, you know, that expression kesya, where it took
Kiyad al kesya.
It took
There's
words,
a hand on the throne of God.
and the words were not complete. Letters are missing, and that is understood as being a direct affront, a direct attack, and diminishment of God's reign here on earth. Now, this week's Parshat talks about what Amalek did to us, and how we were tired, and how we didn't have the faith in Hashem that we should have. So, it's in the first time the incident's recorded, it's our battle on behalf of Hashem, His honor, His glory. And this time in this week's Parsha, it's our honor, it's our battle on behalf of ourselves, that we have to straighten ourselves. So it's again, Elul, we have to get back that faith, we have to get back that strength, lose the being tired, and rejuvenate, regroup as individuals and as a nation. And this again is the two aspects to the Temple Mount and to the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, that it's for Hashem and it's for ourselves. Both of those aspects are equally important and equally true. And again, the understanding that the closing verses of the Parsha says that when we destroy Amalek, there will be peace. And we've read in previous readings these past few weeks that when we build the Beit HaMikdash, there will be peace, you know, in our land and from our neighbors outside our land. So that demon, Amalek, which is an external demon and an inner demon, just like the Eshet Yafat, or the woman with a beautiful form, can be an external attraction, or it can be something within ourselves that we have to overcome or embellish or embrace. It's all one. And it's all part of the challenge as individuals, and it's part of the challenge of us as a community of souls, and as a nation based on Torah and living for the perfection, the completion of the Torah. And that is, I think, in the end of the story, that's what it's all about. That's what Parshat Ki Teitzei is all about. When you go out to war against your inner enemies, your outer enemies, when you go out to war against all the things that you've been putting off until this point in time, and now it's time to actually bring things to a conclusion. And of course, very beautifully, this week's Parshat Ki Teitzei, when you go out to war, is followed by next week's Parshat Ki Tavo, when you come into the land and inherit the land. And of course, we'll have much to say about that next week.
And we've been putting off the Temple Mount for too long. You said things that we've been putting off, and that's why this is coming to the surface now, because it's undeniable that its time has come, and we are being confronted with choices as a nation.
So I would say to everybody, as we take this month of reflection and introspection and stock taking, and look at ourselves very in a cold light, perhaps, without all the embellishments and the adornments that we give ourselves throughout the year, and really look at the cold hard facts about who we are, where we're going, what we want to be. I think we should take time to think about ourselves and our relationship with the Temple Mount and what that's all about, because that is crucial to the world, to world peace, to Israel's place among the nations, and to who we are and what we're all about, as well as individuals, whether we're here in the land of Israel or elsewhere. The Holy Temple is the place, the phenomenon, the place that God shows His presence will dwell, bring all mankind together in peace. Thanks for being with us.